Hey everyone. Tonight we're heading somewhere deep. So deep that even light itself gets nervous about going. We're talking about a world of silence, pressure, and forgotten movement. But I wasn't diving into the Mariana Trench or spelunking through some hollow volcano. No, this was something else entirely. I was chasing a pulse. A very particular one. See, it started a few months ago, with a seismograph in Okinawa twitching in a rhythm that didn't look like a quake. It looked like language. 3 deep booms, pause, then 1 long hum, then silence, and then again. 3 booms, 1 hum, every 12 hours, like clockwork. And I mean literal clockwork. Like it was scheduled. I had a buddy in Sydney who thought it was just tectonic plates grinding in harmony. He called it nature's indigestion. But to me, it was a whisper, a ripple through the fabric of the earth. Like someone big, really big, was knocking politely before entering. Now here's the thing. Most people think Godzilla just stomps around wrecking cities because he's grumpy. But what if he's not just stomping? What if he's saying something? That's why I went to the coast. Not to see if the big guy would show, but to listen. And you know what I heard? Whispers in the dark, faint ones, coming from far below. Some sonar operators call it the ghost layer, an echo chamber about 6 miles beneath the ocean floor where sound does weird things. Imagine yelling into a canyon and hearing someone else's voice answer. I dropped a drone with a low frequency sensor down there. I figured maybe I'd catch some whale songs or tectonic noise. Instead, I got a response. Low, vibrating, rhythmic, and complex. Too complex for an accident. It wasn't speech, not in the human sense. But it was a system. The hums had duration. The pulses had pitch. It was like listening to Morse code written by someone the size of a skyscraper and older than human civilization. You ever hear something so big it makes your teeth vibrate? That's what it felt like. Now here's the kicker. After I logged the sound, I mashed the waveform to known seismic records. And guess what? That exact rhythm had been recorded before. Dozens of times. Spread over decades. From Madagascar to Micronesia. Always the same spacing. Same duration. Same sonic footprint. Almost like a signature. Or a summons. Now, I know how that sounds. Believe me, I do. But here's a little old wisdom for you. If something strange keeps happening the same way, it's probably not strange anymore. It's structure. Even ancient sailors knew when to trust the sea's rhythm. They called certain storms breathing waves, because the water seemed to inhale and exhale before swallowing ships whole. I think this was like that. But deeper and bigger. There's an academic term for this kind of thing. Actually, bioseismic communication. It's used to describe how large marine animals, like blue whales or giant squids, might use the pressure of Earth's crust to send signals across enormous distances. But this wasn't a whale. This was organized, intentional, and from the moment I recognized that, something shifted. It wasn't just a monster out there anymore. It was a mind. A big one. One that didn't need language the way we did. Because when you're that size, you are the message. And now, that message was traveling. From the bottom of the sea, right to the surface, right toward us. You might not survive what's coming next, but that's kind of the point. So before you feel like the mystery needs to be solved right away, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And if you're still with me, tell me where you're listening from, drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soft noise, and let's get started on tonight's mystery. Because the tide just shifted, and something ancient is calling. The thing about patterns is, once you see them, you can't unsee them. At first, the tremors just felt like noise. Random, background chaos. But then, with enough caffeine and enough time spent staring at seismic readouts until they looked like modern art, you start seeing threads that don't belong. And it wasn't just me. A geophysicist in Reykjavik, bless her nerdy soul, shared her seismic logs with me after I mentioned the low-frequency pulses. She called them the lullaby earthquakes. Why? Because every time the rhythm hit, the deep-sea wildlife calmed down. Schooling fish tightened their formations. Sharks stopped circling. Even whales, those majestic blimps of the ocean, shifted course. Like they were listening. So I laid out a full year's worth of data. Every pulse I could find. Guess what emerged? A grid. The events weren't just frequent, they were precise. Latitude and longitude aligned to specific undersea zones. Pacific, Indian, even under the frigid South Atlantic where no monster was ever officially documented. But something lived there, multiple somethings. I started plotting this grid on a 3D globe, color-coding each signal by intensity. The brightest pulse always came from the Pacific, about 1,000 miles off the Marianas Trench. That's Godzilla's neighborhood. But the second brightest, deep inside the African tectonic divide. Not Kong, not Ghidorah, something older, I think, and between those 2 points, a whole chain of tremors flared up, like dominoes falling in a loop. Boom, pause, boom, pause, then silence, then repeat. It was like watching a military communication network in real time, except instead of towers and satellites, the messages were being passed through the Earth's bones. You ever accidentally butt dial someone and end up revealing more than you meant to? That's what I think I caught here. Not an intentional message, but a leak. Like someone left the door cracked just wide enough. So I dug deeper, cross-referenced everything with known Titan appearances over the last 50 years. And here's the thing. Every major emergence, San Francisco, Skull Island, even Antarctica, was preceded by one of these pulse loops. Each time, the same pattern. It's like they were checking in. Calling roll. Titan 1, present. Titan 2, still asleep. Titan 3, missing. And then, someone gets up. The old seafaring cultures had a saying, when the mountains speak, the world holds its breath. I always thought that was just poetic nonsense. But now, I think they meant this. A hierarchy isn't just about who's strongest. It's about communication, about organization, even order, even in the animal kingdom. The most effective leaders aren't the loudest, they're the most consistent. The wolf who growls once and never has to again. That's what I saw in the data. Godzilla wasn't out there screaming into the void. He was keeping the line clear. And what's more unsettling, the pulses weren't his alone. There were others, higher frequency tremors, quicker intervals, nervous energy, like responses. One in the Arctic shelf, one near Fiji, one under Tokyo Bay. They were shorter, jittery, almost anxious. I swear to you, it felt like they were checking in with the alpha. Still good down there? Yes. Okay, just making sure. Please don't eat me. It wasn't until I noticed the timing that it hit me. The pulses aligned perfectly with lunar cycles. Yeah, the moon, which, for reasons I still can't explain, seemed to trigger a global synchronization. Like the Earth's own heartbeat syncing to an ancient drum. A quirky aside, crabs do this too. Certain species of fiddler crabs only mate during a full moon. Why? Nobody knows. But maybe, just maybe, they're hearing something we aren't. So now the academic debate creeps in. Right? Do we call this behavioral coincidence? Or do we call it hierarchical structure? And if we go with the latter, then what kind of society are we dealing with? Because let me tell you, folks, this isn't just kaiju chaos anymore. This is protocol. This is scheduling. This is rules. I once read an old anthropological theory that said, before law came ritual, and before ritual came fear. Maybe that's true for Titans too. Maybe they learned, ages ago, that staying in line meant survival. Not just theirs. Ours. It was in the Philippines that I finally saw it happen with my own eyes. Not on a screen, not through sonar, but standing on the edge of a cliff, heart hammering against my ribs, holding my breath so hard I forgot I had lungs. I was there following reports of deep-sea tremors that had shaken the archipelago. Locals were terrified, not of earthquakes, those they were used to. No, this was different. They said the sea bowed. I laughed at first. I thought it was poetic imagery. Until I saw the satellite footage, a massive displacement of water. Not from an explosion or quake, but from a pull, as if the ocean itself was bending towards something, someone. So I chartered a boat. And I waited. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No birds, no waves, just an eerie stillness, like the entire Pacific was holding its breath. Then, the shimmer, rippling through the water, like heat rising from asphalt. And then, a shadow, no a presence, rising slowly, deliberately, a shape too massive to comprehend at once. I could barely register its scale, only the intention behind its movement. Godzilla, but not alone, because just beyond him, trailing like a satellite orbiting a planet, was another figure, one I'd never seen before. Some kind of ancient leviathan. with fins like tattered sails and bioluminescent stripes running down its spine. And here's what made me choke on my disbelief. It lowered its head, not from injury, not from exhaustion, but in submission. It bowed. And Godzilla, he just stood there, eyes half closed, like a monarch tolerating an audience. There was no fight, no posturing, no dominance display, just acknowledgement. You ever see an apex predator accept a gesture without reacting? That's not instinct, that's etiquette. Like he was saying, you've crossed into my realm. Good, you remembered the rules. It made me think of those stories about old lions letting younger ones eat first during a drought, not because they were weak, but because they understood balance. And maybe that's the old wisdom here. True kings don't take, they allow. As I watched, the Leviathan dipped back beneath the waves, slipping away like a respectful servant. And Godzilla, he turned, and slowly, returned to the deep. No roar, no destruction, just order. And I realized something chilling. If Godzilla was the center of this hierarchy, then every other titan was not just another monster. They were participants in a structured system, a society, one that knew its place, one that remembered ancient roles, one that still functioned, even when humans were completely unaware. It reminded me of something quirky I'd read once in a marine biology journal. Octopuses can recognize individual humans. Not just shapes, faces. They remember who feeds them and who pokes them. And that's a freaking octopus. So what does that say about titans? I was still reeling when I returned to land and shared the footage with a cryptozoologist I trusted. His first words, that's not submission, that's protocol. And it hit me like a freight train of thought. This wasn't about strength, it was about rank. We often assume monsters are driven by aggression. But what if they're driven by something far more human? Respect, hierarchy, ritual. The academic debate, of course, is messy. Some argue it's anthropomorphizing, projecting human traits onto animals. But that debate always forgets one thing. These aren't animals. They're titans. And when you're that old, that big, and that connected to the rhythms of the planet, you don't need words. Your actions become law. So here I was, a tiny human who had just witnessed the equivalent of a royal salute from a being the size of a cathedral. And I realized something even more terrifying. If there's a throne, there's always someone waiting to take it. Because if Godzilla was king, then somewhere, lurking in the shadows of this ancient network, there had to be challenges. And not every monster bows. You can't talk about kingdoms without talking about thrones. And in the hollow earth, thrones aren't made of gold, they're carved from stone, from the bones of forgotten giants, and from the silence of a world older than our myths. After what I witnessed with Godzilla and the bowing Leviathan, I knew I had to go deeper, literally. That meant getting to Hollow Earth. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's just legend. Right? Hollow Earth is sci-fi fluff. Not real science. But let me hit you with this little academic debate term, non-Euclidean strata theory. Basically, it's the idea that under extreme pressure and density, space doesn't behave the way we think it does. The Earth could curve in on itself and create zones that act like massive inner caverns, pockets of preserved ancient ecosystems. In other words, real estate for titans. So I hitched a ride with a crew from Munich who owed me a favor, and let's be honest, they also kind of wanted to get rid of me. Our entry point, a gravity well off the Antarctic shelf. It was like skydiving through molasses, if molasses was full of floating rocks. Warp time, and the occasional flying lizard the size of a jet. And then we landed, if you can call it that. The hollow Earth wasn't just hollow. It was alive. Glowing forests, floating islands, massive waterfalls that flowed upward. And in the distance, like the skeleton of a god that forgot how to die, a throne. I use that word intentionally, because what we found was not a pile of rocks, or a geological fluke. It was a constructed seat, perfectly balanced, cut with sharp angles. Symbolic carvings in spiral patterns ran across the backrest. This wasn't natural erosion. This was design, built for something massive, something regal, something like Kong. And here's the weirdest part, scattered around it were smaller platforms. Semicircular, tiered, like a council chamber. The moment we stepped inside, the air changed, thick with history, heavy with silence, as if a great conversation had ended just before we entered. It made me think of the ruins of Machu Picchu, or Angkor Wat, places not just built for shelter or worship, but for discussion. Strategy, order, Here's an old piece of explorer wisdom I remembered then, when stones whisper. You're not the first to ask the question. And in this place, the stones were screaming in silence. The closer I got to the main throne, the more I noticed the wear. Claw marks on the stone armrest, as if some enormous hand had gripped it tightly, over and over. Perhaps during moments of decision, or fury, or regret. And behind the throne, a mural, etched deep, not painted, 3 figures. One looked like Kong, one like Godzilla, and the third, I didn't recognize. Serpentine, winged, terrifying. They were arranged in a triangle, with a glowing spiral in the middle. My colleague muttered, "That's not mythology, that's memory. A quirk for you. Sea turtles migrate thousands of miles to the exact beach they were born on. Guided by magnetic fields we barely understand. If turtles can remember their birthplace across oceans, imagine what titans remember across millennia." This wasn't just a throne room. It was a council hall. And the mural, a reminder of balance, of alliance, and maybe even betrayal. It became clear to me that these thrones weren't about control. They were about responsibility. Someone had to keep the chaos in check. And Kong, he wasn't just a beast thrown into hollow earth. He was meant to return, to reclaim something lost, to take his seat, not to rule, but to restore, because kingdoms fall. But the structure, the system, it survives, even when buried beneath 1,000 years of ash and silence. I didn't expect the silence to be the loudest part. We had made camp just outside the throne's structure, me and 2 monarch scientists who were brave enough, or maybe just bored enough, to stick around. There was no wind, no rustle, not even distant thunder. It was the kind of quiet that made your thoughts feel too loud. And then, Kong arrived. No fanfare, no earth-shaking footsteps echoing like drumbeats through the valley. Just a shift in the air, a shadow moving like slow thunder. He stepped from behind a stone ridge and stood there, towering. Broad-shouldered, eyes glowing like forgotten suns. He didn't roar, didn't posture, just walked, and sat. Right on the throne, like he'd done it before. Like it was his. The 2 scientists beside me froze. I couldn't move either. We weren't in danger, but we weren't in control either. You ever see something so ancient that your brain just sort of gives up? That's what this was. Kong sat for a while in complete stillness. But then came the others. Small titans, not baby monsters, but smaller species, quadrupeds, feathered beasts, one that looked like a walking mountain goat with tusks the size of tree trunks. They emerged from the mists, cautiously, respectfully, and they gathered. Like they were waiting. One creature approached slowly and made a low rumble, a sound that felt less like a growl and more like a question. Kong responded with a tilt of the head, a grunt, a subtle flex of one hand, and the creature backed away. Now, I'm no expert in ape diplomacy, but even I could tell this was no random encounter. This was deliberate, structured, a council meeting, or maybe a check-in. Here's an old wisdom from chimpanzee behavior. The leader who grooms more than he strikes rules longer. And that was exactly what Kong was doing here, leading through recognition. Not dominance. He didn't fight. He listened. He observed. He acknowledged. It reminded me of a bizarre fact I once read. Elephants can detect distant thunderstorms by sensing underground vibrations through their feet. They literally feel messages coming through the earth. So maybe these creatures, maybe they weren't meeting Kong out of fear. Maybe they were called. Maybe they could feel him arrive. His presence wasn't noise. It was signal. I reached slowly for my camera, careful not to spook anyone, and began filming. The lens shook with adrenaline. Not from the ground. As the minutes passed, the smaller titans began dispersing, each one making some low sound or display before retreating. And Kong, he never moved, just watched, occasionally huffed, occasionally grunted. Every so often, he'd place his hand on the stone armrest of the throne and tap. A slow, deliberate beat, like a heartbeat, like memory. And here's where the academic debate starts to melt. Was this instinct, or was this culture? I'm leaning toward the second. Because what I saw that night was not a beast sitting on a pile of rocks. It was a leader holding council. With gestures, with history, with grace. And suddenly the idea of monster felt almost disrespectful. They weren't monsters. They were elders. And Kong was their alpha, yes. But he was also something more. A keeper, of peace, of stories, of balance. And as I sat there, trying to process this thunderous silence, a ridiculous thought popped into my head. This is just the jungle's version of a PTA meeting. Except if any parent misbehaved, the playground might collapse into a pit of lava. Still, it made me laugh quietly to myself. And I swear, for a split second, I saw Kong's lip twitch like he knew. Like he understood the joke. Or maybe he was just amused I'd survived long enough to hear it. When Kong finally rose from the throne, the stone beneath him groaned, not cracked or crumbled, but sighed like it had been holding its breath for centuries and could finally exhale again. And I swear, I felt that sigh in my bones. He didn't look at us, just turned and walked down the stone steps like a judge leaving court. And as he disappeared into the mist, something strange happened. The entire terrain shifted. Not physically, more like a change in atmosphere. The air grew thinner, sharper, like the gravity of the moment had lifted, and the hollow earth was adjusting itself. I turned to the Monic scientists, both still wide-eyed and slack-jawed, and said, only half joking, did we just witness a prehistoric town hall? One of them, a woman named Carla, nodded slowly, or a court, and he's not just king. He's a custodian. She was right, because later that day, as we hiked through one of the winding cliff trails that led deeper into Hollow Earth's bioluminescent jungle, we came across something impossible. A library, not of books, of course, but structures, monolithic slabs etched with glyphs, ancient carvings that told stories in shapes, spirals, and sequences. The same three figures again: Kong, Godzilla, and that serpentine horror with wings like knives and a tail that seemed to split the sky. And this time, they weren't standing together, they were in conflict. Each glyph showed more: Kong wielding a jagged club, Godzilla's spines glowing like the sun, the winged one looming above like an eclipse made of hunger. But the final panel, that's what stopped me cold. It showed Kong alone, seated, surrounded by the ashes of giants. No Godzilla, no winged one, just the ape, watching, waiting. That's when the old saying echoed in my mind: a true alpha doesn't crave the fight. He survives it. And something quirky hit me too: parrots can pass the mirror test. You know, the one where they recognize themselves in a reflection. Most animals can't do that. But parrots, they get it. They know they exist. What if Kong knows too? What if he remembers? Not just instinctively, but consciously. And if that's true, then he's more than just the king of Hollow Earth. He's its historian, its witness, its last living memory of an ancient war that shattered the balance and birthed the very order he now protects. The deeper we explored, the more structures we found: collapsed arenas, old council rings, even what looked like Titan-sized irrigation systems. These creatures didn't just fight and roar, they built, they farmed, they shaped the land, which raises an overtly academic debate. Can an ecosystem run by creatures of immense power still qualify as a civilization if its form of communication defies human understanding? I say yes, because civilization isn't just language or architecture. It's memory, it's the preservation of experience. And these stones, they remembered. So I sat down and traced one of the glyphs with my fingers. It felt warm, alive, almost, like it wanted to tell me something. Maybe it did, because I dreamed that night. Vivid, disturbing, electric. I was in a war, not watching, but in it. Titans clashed across valleys of ash. Their roars tore the sky open. But even through the chaos, I saw him, Kong, standing still in the middle of it all. Staff in hand, eyes glowing with knowing. He wasn't fighting, he was judging. And when I woke up, one phrase echoed in my skull like thunder inside a cavern: the last to roar is the one they follow. Morning hit Hollow Earth like a whisper. No blazing sunrises, no chirping birds, just a slow, bioluminescent fade-in that turned the sky from obsidian to deep sapphire. And with it came a low vibration in the ground, barely there. Like the planet was clearing its throat. That meant one thing: another Titan was on the move. Carla and I exchanged a look. We didn't need to say anything. The pattern was becoming obvious now. Kong had returned to the throne. And that meant something. It was a signal, sent not just through seismic waves or pheromonal shifts, but through the invisible lattice of instinct and memory that bound this place together. And sure enough, later that afternoon, we saw it: Godzilla. Now, before you imagine a dramatic entrance, let me set the scene properly. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a standoff. It was a rendezvous. Godzilla rose from a lake so deep it may as well have touched the core. Water hissed off his dorsal fins like steam escaping a forgotten engine. Every step he took toward Kong sent a tremor through my spine and my soul. And then they met. Just stood there. Two creatures, titanic in size, prehistoric in age, mythic in presence. And then it happened. Godzilla dipped his head, not low, not submissive, but a subtle tilt. And Kong, he tapped his chest twice and lifted his hand outward. It was the same gesture he made to the smaller titans. Recognition, respect. But this was different. Because when Godzilla growled, low, deep, rolling like distant thunder, it wasn't aggressive. It was language. The sound wasn't just heard, it was felt. In the ribs, in the blood, in the memory. And I remembered something quirky again. Prairie dogs have different barks for different predators. Like, literally, one sound for hawk and another for coyote. Complex communication in burrowing rodents. So what the hell do titans say? Maybe something like, I acknowledge your return. I remember the cost. I'm ready to begin again. Kong responded, not with a roar, but with a gesture, a slow turn toward the throne. And Godzilla followed, side by side, in complete silence. They weren't rivals here, they were equals, which led me to a revelation so big it almost felt like heresy. The hierarchy wasn't linear. It wasn't one titan ruling the others from a throne made of dominance. It was shared, rotating, reactive, like a tide, ebbing and flowing depending on who the earth needed most. Godzilla, guardian of the oceans, the balance keeper, the enforcer. Kong, keeper of memory, the land-based judge, the reconciler, each one a node in a far more intricate network than we ever imagined. And the rest, they weren't just followers, they were delegates. I felt like I was staring at a living version of the United Nations, except instead of diplomats. They were walking cataclysms, and just like that, the academic debate opened wide. Are we witnessing a government? Or a religion? Because every gesture, every pause, every low-frequency rumble felt ritualistic. Deliberate. Not for show, but for balance. Here's an old piece of monk wisdom that hit me hard right then. The louder the ceremony, the smaller the truth. And these titans, they didn't need noise, just motion, just intention. That night, as I tried to sleep against the humming of the hollow earth, I couldn't shake a terrifying thought. If this is a functioning titan society, then what happens when one of them breaks the rules? I didn't have to wait long to get my answer. We were woken around midnight, not by tremors, not by roars, but by the absence of sound. Total stillness. It was as if hollow earth itself had paused, holding its pulse, bracing. Then, crack. Not a natural sound, not tectonic. This was organic, sharp, wet, like a bone snapped under pressure. And then came the scream. But not from Kong, not from Godzilla. It was something new. I scrambled to the ridge where we'd seen the council form days earlier. My heart was pounding so hard I swear I could hear it echoing off the stone. What I saw chilled me. Kong was standing, but not in the usual way. This was rigid. His fists were clenched, his breathing shallow but controlled. Like a father about to discipline a child, not out of anger, but necessity. In front of him, a titan we hadn't seen before. Slender, spiny, glowing like it had swallowed a dying star. Its body pulsed with blue light, but not like Godzilla's elegant luminescence. This was erratic, flickering, chaotic, and it was making noise. Too much noise. Screeching, not communicating, broadcasting. The other titans had formed a ring at a distance. Watching, not intervening. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a fight. This was a trial. Kong took one step forward. The glowing titan reared back and hissed. Kong didn't flinch. Another step, another hiss, until finally, Kong raised his arm, held it still, and then drove his fist down into the earth beside him. Boom! The glowing titan collapsed, not from injury, but from sheer psychological defeat. Kong didn't strike it. He challenged it, and it yielded. There's an old bit of jungle wisdom. The leader who controls the silence controls the story. And tonight, Kong wrote volumes. Carla whispered beside me. It disobeyed. I nodded, or it tried to rewrite the order. We watched as the glowing titan slunk away, its light dimming with every step. This wasn't random aggression. This was social correction. You see, in a world of creatures powerful enough to shatter continents, restraint is the real show of power. Godzilla, somewhere in the lake, didn't surface. Because he didn't need to. Kong had handled it. It's like ants. Did you know they quarantine their sick? No medical degrees, no formal policies, just understood behavior, for the good of the colony. This felt the same. A rogue titan shows signs of instability, erratic bioluminescence, overly loud vocalizations, breach of ceremonial protocol, so it's met by the alpha. Not destroyed, corrected. And this leads us into one of the most fascinating academic debates I've ever had with myself in a cave surrounded by monsters. Is hierarchy in Titan society enforced through violence, or through cultural memory and mutual reinforcement? Tonight suggested the latter, because no blood was spilled. But order was restored. As the other Titans dispersed, I noticed something else. A few of them, small feathered creatures with vibrant ridges, started mimicking Kong's motion. The hand slam, the stillness, like they were learning, like they understood, and suddenly, the idea that monsters are mindless looked even more ridiculous. You don't get this kind of synchronization without shared rules. And here's the kicker. I caught myself bowing slightly as we walked away. Not because I had to, but because respect is contagious. There's a strange kind of peace in a society that corrects itself, not with chaos, but with structure. And as I sat beside the lake the next morning, watching the surface steam like a sleeping volcano, I began connecting dots I hadn't dared to before. The Titans weren't random, they weren't scattered, they were organized, and not just through dominance or fear, but through territory. Territories that weren't just about food supply or nesting grounds. These zones were cultural. Let me explain. We'd started mapping movement patterns based on seismic data and hollow Earth energy readings. What we found were overlapping zones, like Venn diagrams between species, but the overlaps weren't areas of conflict. They were neutral zones, places for meetings, for exchanges, for diplomacy. Kong's region was massive, covering dense jungle, volcanic ridges, and ancient ruins, but he never crossed into the wide open plains. Those belonged to something else. We later spotted what we believed to be Behemoth, the mammoth-like titan with tree-trunk limbs. And even though Kong could have dominated that territory with ease, he didn't. He respected the boundary, just like wolves will howl to warn nearby packs and avoid unnecessary bloodshed. These titans were broadcasting their presence in subtle, seismic ways, a vibration here, a ground pulse there, the language of the earth itself. And guess who never once crossed anyone's line? Godzilla. He didn't need to, because his zone was the ocean. All of it. The currents, the trenches, the reefs. Godzilla patrolled a planet-wide kingdom without ever having to raise his claws. He'd simply appear, and the message was clear. Balance is watching. I once read that orangutans construct nests with built-in drainage systems. No joke. They'll build in layers, one for support, one for comfort, one for protection. That level of forethought. Now imagine titans with thousands of years of instinct and passed down behavior patterns. We saw rock formations, seemingly natural, until we realized they were arranged in circular patterns, like fences, not to keep things out, but to mark where a specific titan ruled. And within each circle, different flora grew. Coincidence? Maybe, but the academic in me knew better. These were gardens of memory, each ecosystem tailored to the titan it nurtured. Biomes shaped not by evolution alone, but by will, preferences, personality. Godzilla preferred deep thermal vents and bioluminescent sea creatures. Kong favored high plateaus with rocky overlooks and shade-giving trees. Behemoth liked flatlands and root networks. Even the flying ones, like Rodan, claimed high volcanic altitudes, not just survival niches, homes. And yet, despite the differences, none of them overstepped. Not anymore. I looked over at Carla and said, "We've been watching a global Cold War between gods." She nodded, and the piece is behavioral. It was as if every titan had inherited not just power, but protocol, passed down through motion, through ritual, through memory encoded in bone. Old jungle wisdom says, a tree's roots know where to stop, even if its branches don't. Well, the titans, they are the roots, and the boundaries they honor aren't just drawn in the dirt. They're etched into the rhythm of the earth itself. It hit me like a falling meteor. What if the real reason titans emerged during crisis wasn't destruction? What if it was recalibration? Godzilla emerging during imbalance, Kong returning when diplomacy is needed. Each monster not a threat, but a response. And in their society, their territories aren't lines in the sand. They're agreements. unwritten, but understood. And if even one is broken, well, we already saw what happens then. The deeper we trekked into Hollow Earth, the more I started noticing things that made less sense as random evolution and more as signs. Clues, warnings. There were murals, again, not painted, but carved, and always in spiral formations, always in the deepest corners. At first, I thought they were just storytelling sequences like the others, until Carla said something I couldn't shake. These are positions, and she was right. Each spiral wasn't just an artistic flourish. It was a map, not of space, but of roles, social roles, hierarchies. One spiral showed Kong in the center, surrounded by land titans, creatures with claws, wings, hooves. Another had Godzilla as the nucleus, radiating energy out toward smaller aquatic or amphibious beasts. Each spiral was different, but structured, balanced, and all were connected by the same core motif. A ring of watchers, larger figures, fewer in number, always standing, never bowing, eyes carved more sharply, bodies static, and at the center of every spiral, a single, glowing symbol, roughly shaped like an hourglass inside a circle. We dubbed it the spiral code. It wasn't a language in the way we think of it. It was more like an operating system, a philosophy written in motion, a belief. And the closer I looked at it, the more I realized it wasn't about dominance. It was about symmetry. An overt academic debate immediately comes to mind. Can non-linguistic beings maintain a stable social order through physical and spatial memory alone? My answer now, yes, because these spirals are memory, just not our kind. There's an old shepherd's proverb that says, "The flock remembers where the wolf came from, even if the wolf forgets." That's what this felt like. The Titans might forget moments, but their systems remember. Carla whispered, "They don't just have territories, they have roles." And suddenly the memory trials, the silent bowing, the ceremonial duels, they all made sense. The spiral code wasn't a warning, it was a contract. Each Titan wasn't just a beast, they were a node in a living machine, a gear in a system that ran on instinct and enforcement. But here's the kicker, one spiral was different, incomplete. It showed a break in the outer ring, one watcher missing. And in the center, a crack, not the hourglass, just void, not a mistake, a prophecy. And as we moved deeper into the cave, we saw the broken glyph. Once a massive, it had collapsed into itself, shattered, like someone, or something, had intentionally destroyed part of the story. That's when I remembered something off topic but weirdly relevant. Dolphins have signature whistles. Like names, they call each other, and if one goes missing, the others keep calling for years. What if this missing glyph, what if this void, was the Titan's way of calling for someone who's gone? Or worse, someone who's coming back. We backed out of the cave slowly, the spiral code still glowing faintly behind us. And even though we were surrounded by mist, stone, and roots older than civilization, I felt something new, not fear, not awe, but urgency. Because if the Titans are a society, and they are, then that broken spiral means the system is vulnerable. And someone, somewhere, knows it. That night, I couldn't sleep, not because of the humidity, or the constant glow of bioluminescent fungi, or even the occasional distant roar. It was the spiral, the broken one. It pulsed behind my eyelids like a memory I hadn't earned, like a dream someone else had left behind for me to finish. I sat up, flipped on my audio recorder, and just talked. If they have laws, they have history. If they have history, they have regret. The words felt too heavy in my mouth. And that's when I heard it. Not a roar, not footsteps. A click. Soft, repetitive, mechanical, no, rhythmic, like bone tapping stone. I crept toward the sound, barely daring to breathe, and then, through a break in the foliage, I saw Kong, alone, facing a wall of vines, his hands stretched out, tapping. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap. He was drumming, but not for fun, not for dominance. It was morning. Kong wasn't just remembering, he was calling for the one missing from the spiral. And the wall in front of him, it wasn't just stone, it was a grave. I could barely make it out. But there were remains, massive, fossilized bones curved like spires, half swallowed by the earth. One of the watchers, I realized, a Titan like Kong, once a guardian, now fallen. And that's when the old wisdom hit like a hammer. Grief is the tax we pay for memory. Kong remembers this one, not as a rival, as a brother, or maybe, a mentor. It reframed everything. The way he walked, the way he sat on the throne, the way he never roared without reason. He wasn't mimicking leadership, he was inheriting it, and now he was alone in it. I thought of something oddly relevant. Crows, yes. Crows hold funerals. They gather, they caw, they circle the spot where one of their own died. Science still can't fully explain it. But maybe it's not science. Maybe it's just grief with wings. And Kong, his grief didn't need wings. It had gravity. He sat by that grave until the pale green light of hollow earth turned violet blue. He didn't eat. He didn't rest. He just tapped, over and over, a beat so old I think the rocks themselves knew the rhythm. And as I stood there, an intruder to a funeral of gods, I felt the urge to do something absurd. I bowed, not out of fear, out of respect. The spiral wasn't just broken. It was haunted, because society isn't just laws and roles. It's loss. And Kong carried that loss alone. So the next time someone calls him a monster, I'll just ask, does your monster mourn? I woke up the next morning to an eerie quiet again. But this time, it wasn't just the silence of hollow earth's strange rhythm, it was a stillness that pressed on your skin. Like the atmosphere itself was holding its breath. Carla met my eyes the second I stepped out of the cave. She didn't need to say anything. We both felt it. Something had shifted. And then, thunder. Except it wasn't from the sky. It came from below. A deep, rolling quake that pulsed like a drumbeat. But unlike Kong's morning rhythm, this one was chaotic, disjointed, angry. We ran. Through glowing moss fields. Over bone bridges. Past vines thicker than telephone poles. And then we saw it. The center of the spiral. The throne. It was empty. Not just abandoned, shattered. A massive crater where Kong once sat. Blackened edges still smoking. And from the other side of the crater, footprints. But not Kong's. They were sharper, more taloned. Reptilian. Godzilla? No. Something else. Something new. Or worse, something old. Carla gasped. He's been challenged. That word sent a chill through me. Because in the Titan society, a challenge wasn't just a fight. It was a reckoning. I heard stories once, from a shaman in Borneo who claimed that orangutans used to guard sacred riverbeds. If one fell, the others wouldn't move in. They'd leave the area untouched. Sanctified. So what does it mean when the center of the spiral is desecrated? It means something has rejected the system. It doesn't want a seat at the table. It wants to flip the table. We tracked the talon prints for miles, each one steaming slightly, the air above them shimmering with heat. The path led us to a massive fissure, a jagged canyon splitting the terrain like a scar. Down in the chasm, we saw it. Wings. Not rodents. Not MUTO. Different. Larger. Thicker. And glowing. Not blue like Godzilla's atomic breath. Not red like Rodin's fire, but green. Sickly. Radioactive. And then a sound. No. Not a roar. A laugh. Dry. Broken. Like metal scraping bone. Carla whispered. Ghidorah didn't die. I didn't answer. Because I wasn't sure either. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was something worse. A remnant. A mutation. A leftover from the war we only thought was over. One of the watchers who refused to fall. And it was now climbing back into the spiral. Uninvited. There's an academic phrase I remember reading once. When the core fails, the periphery radicalizes. This thing, it was here to radicalize the Titans. To end balance. And for the first time in this whole journey, I said the one thing no scientist ever wants to admit. I think we're too late. Too late. Those two words echoed inside me like a warning bell ringing in a sunken cathedral. I couldn't stop replaying the crater where the throne once stood, the broken seat of order, the fractured nucleus of the spiral. And now, it was open season. Titans, once aligned like a living constellation of cosmic etiquette, had begun to move, but not in ritual, not in rhythm, in disarray. Carla and I reached a high ridge where the old vines had been burned away, revealing a wide overlook of the valley below. We saw them, 3 Titans, not fighting, but circling one another in frantic patterns. No head bows, no ground pounding, no shared cues, just chaos. The code was unraveling. Carla scribbled in her field journal, but stopped midway. If Kong is alive, she said, he has to fix this fast. And if he wasn't, then there's only Godzilla. But here's the terrifying thought that hit me next. What if the spiral code can't be restored by a single titan? What if that shared balance could only be maintained when two minds, Kong and Godzilla, reflected one another? Kept the other in check? Because let's be real, Kong is the heart, but Godzilla, he's the nuclear backbone, and when you remove either, everything destabilizes. That's how it happens in nature too. You take out apex predators from an ecosystem, wolves from Yellowstone, sharks from reefs, and the entire food web collapses. But this wasn't about prey and predator. This was culture. We spotted Kong at twilight. Barely. He was limping, dragging his left arm, his fur matted with blood and ash. But his eyes, still burning. He wasn't defeated. He was reeling. And then he looked up, at us. No aggression, no curiosity. Just grief. Because what I didn't notice at first, but Carla did, was the pendant, hanging from his side. A carved tooth. Not his. Another Titan's. The fallen one from the grave. He'd carried it into battle. And lost the fight anyway. That pendant wasn't a weapon. It was a reminder of what he was defending. What he was losing. Old proverb, you can't carry the village if your back is broken. And Kong, he was trying. Alone. We scrambled down the ridge toward him, ignoring every protocol we were trained to follow. He didn't stop us. Didn't roar. Just sat. The Titans in the valley had scattered again, sensing his return. But not in fear, in confusion. They didn't know what role to play anymore. Because the spiral wasn't just broken now. It was missing its center. Carla stood beside him and whispered something I'll never forget. Don't sit on the throne. Stand at its center. Because maybe that's what Titan society needs now. Not kings, but pillars. Not dominance, but reminders. And Kong, he nodded, like he heard her. Or maybe, he'd already known. By dawn, the hollow earth had changed. It wasn't the terrain, not the weather, not even the Titan's behavior. It was the feeling, like waking up in a house after something unspeakable had happened. Everything looks the same, but nothing feels safe. Kong was already on his feet, towering over the cracked spiral ridge. His injured arm dragged slightly behind him, but his stance had changed. He wasn't pacing, he was waiting. For what? We found out soon enough. The sky above, not the hollow earth ceiling, but something beyond, began to split. Thin slivers of unnatural green light sliced through the atmosphere. Like claws on film. Carla froze. That's not just light, it's a breach. A dimensional scar. We'd seen minor ones before. Tiny folds in hollow earth's magnetic field. But this was a doorway. And the thing that emerged. It wasn't Ghidorah. It wasn't anything in Monarch's files. It was skeletal, with wings like torn curtains and a head that looked like three spines merged into one. It didn't roar. It hummed, low, piercing, so loud I thought my fillings might vibrate out of my teeth. The Titans all stopped, even Kong, because the humming wasn't just noise, it was commands. Old ones, buried deep in their biology. I watched in horror as some of them twitched, eyes glowing the wrong color, limbs moving out of sync with their own rhythms. It's rewriting the code, I whispered. This thing wasn't just a monster. It was a virus, not to their bodies, but to their society. An infection of the spiral. I remembered something obscure from a podcast about octopuses. They can change their RNA daily. Rewrite themselves. No waiting for generations. Just adaptation on the fly. What if this thing could do that? To the others, Kong didn't hesitate. He charged. Even injured. Even outclassed. Because this wasn't just a threat to his throne. It was a threat to memory itself. The virus thing struck first, sending a shockwave through the ground. Carla fell. I pulled her behind a ridge. But Kong, he stayed standing. Barely. One hand on the ground. One gripping a shard of obsidian like a makeshift blade. He didn't roar. He growled. Low. Controlled. The hum faltered. Just a beat. But enough. Because in that beat, something else answered. From the distant canyon. From the blackened depths of the geothermal trench. Godzilla. Emerging not like a soldier, but like justice incarnate. The spiral wasn't just being defended now. It was being rebuilt. Side by side. Not king and challenger. Not predator and primate. But pillars. Two anchors of a society fighting not for dominance, but remembrance. I clutched Carla's hand, both of us breathless, and said the words I never expected to mean literally. This is the day the monsters save each other. The moment Godzilla stepped into the light, the temperature in hollow earth changed. Not metaphorically, literally. The thick, Humid air split with a crackling energy I could feel in my teeth. Like someone dropped a thunderstorm inside my skull. The green glow from the breach flickered, fighting against something older. Deeper, bluer, that unmistakable charge of atomic breath building in the depths of his throat. But he didn't fire, not yet, because he didn't look at the intruder. He looked at Kong, and Kong looked back. No words, no roar, just posture, a shared stance, like a dance choreographed over centuries. A primal ritual, older than any written law. It was recognition. I saw it clear as day. They weren't enemies. They were co-founders. The virus creature shrieked, sensing the shift. Its wings flared, body twisting in unnatural geometry, like it had too many joints and not enough skin. It moved toward Kong, fast, jagged, erratic, but Godzilla was faster. One swing of his tail sent a shockwave that leveled half the cliff face. Then Kong lunged. Together, they attacked, not chaotically, not randomly, in rhythm, like a ritual. The creature struck Kong's shoulder, drawing blood, but didn't knock him down this time, because Godzilla was already there. Atomic breath lighting the air like midnight lightning. Boom, a direct hit to the creature's chest. It stumbled. Kong moved in, gripping its head, twisting, driving it down into the stone circle, right into the center of the spiral, where the code had once been broken. And then, silence. As the dust cleared, the creature twitched once, then turned to ash, dissolved, as if it had no right to exist in a world where balance had returned. Carla and I could barely process it. We watched as the Titans gathered around, those who had fled, those who had wavered. They returned to the spiral, slowly, carefully. They knew. The breach above sealed itself without a sound. Kong stood at the edge of the ring, eyes closed. Godzilla turned and vanished into the mist. Without fanfare, no crown, no throne. Just two Titans who had remembered what they were meant to protect. Not territory, not ego, structure, society. The spiral code hadn't just been restored. It had been defended. There's an old desert proverb, if the map disappears, walk in circles until you feel home. And maybe that's what the spiral really was all along. A home. Carla whispered. They rewrote the code tonight. No, I said. They remembered it. I looked around Hollow Earth one last time before we packed up. The scars would remain, but so would the balance. And I swear to you, as we left that place, I heard it again. A soft, rhythmic beat. Not war drums, not warning, but pulse, heartbeat, of a monster society choosing to live by its own rules. And maybe, just maybe, we should take notes. So, what do we make of all this? A forgotten civilization beneath our feet. Two Titans who aren't enemies but co-founders of a living code. A society we were never meant to see. Operating on instinct, memory, and ritual more ancient than any scroll or scripture. It's strange, isn't it? To call them monsters feels wrong now. Kong, heavy with grief yet still standing tall. Godzilla, the nuclear sentinel who moves with brutal grace. They're not just forces of nature, they're keepers of balance. And what we saw wasn't just a fight. It was a defense of something far deeper than power. They don't rule through fear. They protect through remembrance. The spiral code, those sacred patterns etched in stone and echoed in motion, was never about domination. It was about connection. The roles each Titan played weren't assigned, they were understood. Preserved, mourned when lost, and honored when defended. Even when chaos rose in the form of a mind virus Titan. They didn't destroy it out of rage. They restored the system. That's what society, real society, is. Shared memory, shared burden, shared will. And sometimes, to keep it alive, you need a monster, or two. So as the dust of Hollow Earth settles, and the spiral glows once more beneath layers of root and stone, maybe it's time we stop calling them beasts, and start calling them guardians. Because in the end, it wasn't just a battle between Titans. It was a reminder that even the most terrifying creatures can carry a sacred truth. Society survives not by strength alone, but by balance. Now turn off your thoughts. Let your breath slow, and drift into sleep. They're still down there, watching, guarding. And tonight, all is calm.